Sometimes it goes live before we even know it. But Laura, welcome to Tuesday at 7.
Thank you for inviting me.
We are glad that you've joined us, and we are excited because Tuesday at 7 Eastern Standard Time is the opportunity for creatives to gather and to be inspired, perhaps to learn, to listen to the journeys of other artists that have traveled down a pathway. And I see that people are already joining, so we're excited. We usually do just a couple of minutes of small talk to give people an opportunity to connect. And as soon as we get the opportunity, we're going to go ahead and give away the book from Amanda Ewell from last week. But how's COVID treating you?
Well, COVID has deprived me of having you here. So we had talked about interviewing by the old cow pasture or in front of the chicken coop, and now we're doing this remote thing, which is too bad.
Yeah. When I read your writing, it takes me to what I imagine your cornfields and your those areas around your house that inspire you. And so I would have loved to have seen that, to see that imagery along with those words. But yeah, COVID has forced us to meet here electronically. So
We're all in our little rectangles.
yeah. Wow, people are already joining. Dave, Kurt, thank you for joining us tonight. I know there's others as well. So, Kim, I see that you're there as well. Thank you guys for joining us. It is Tuesday at 7, and we just changed over to the new year. So we're in January of 2021. We are in, hopefully, on the back end of this pandemic and the shutdown. And it's been kind of crazy as we've all been holed up into our houses, and hopefully that inspires some creatives. And if it doesn't, maybe you'll find our discussion with Laura inspiring tonight. Let's start off with last week we had a phenomenal discussion with Amanda Ewell. She writes, I think she wrote all her life, but she had shared with us that she started writing her first book at age 49, and she's about 5 books in. So she is in production mode. When folks read back on that interview, they're going to learn a lot about some of the things that she does, the groups that she's joined. I forgot, but she has a lot of things. So go back and watch that if you're interested in writing. She has been listed. Her writing has been listed or described as clever, suspenseful, and seriously romantic. And so tonight, as we draw a name, and anybody who shared last week's interview, their name is in this magic hat, and we're going to draw that name, and whoever's name is drawn will get a signed copy of Amanda Ewell's book. We'll mail that to you. But if we were together, Laura, I'd have you reach in this hat, but I guess I have to reach it in, and I like to, all right, just make sure I have one. All right, and the winner is Kelly Griffiths. I know Kelly Griffiths is an author as well, so this will probably be a great addition to her collection. I'm really glad that Kelly won, because I know that she had been in contact with Amanda as well regarding some of the things that she's doing. So Kelly, congratulations. We'll reach out. And for those who share this week's episode, this week's discussion, that Laura is going to share a few goodies as well. And your latest book, was that what I understand as well?
I'm going to give away a copy of Blackbird, which is my most recent poetry collection, and a little bit of swag that my husband and I attempted to make for book readings, and chocolate blackbirds.
Fantastic. So you could have chocolate, you can have some swag, and you have a copy of your latest installment of writing. And is Blackbird, is that a book of poetry?
It's a poetry collection. Yep.
Fantastic. All right, so share this along. You can, when you hit that share button, so usually in the bottom of your screen, you could share it out to your friends list. If you belong to a writers group, or you have folks that have an interest in poetry, or might be inspired by listening to Laura's journey and some of the things that she does, you can even share it to specific people. So by doing so, we'll put your name in that Magic Hat next week, and we'll draw your name, and you'll have the opportunity to win Blackbird and chocolate and some of those other goodies. But I usually start our discussions off with an unexpected question, and some people go, no, I expected that type of question. But the question that I'd like to start our conversation off is, Laura, what can we learn from bees?
Oh, wow, that is an essay question. Let's see how much I can compact that. We got bees maybe 20 years ago, and they fascinate me. There's so much mythology and wisdom, but one of the things I learned about bees is that when it gets too hot, the hive has to stay a certain temperature, and they're all in there with their little wings taking care of the queen and the pupa and stuff like that. And when it gets too hot, it's an emergency, and they have an unknown signal that calls in all of the worker bees they can go as far as 2 miles in any direction, calls them back immediately, and they rush to the hive and they fan with their wings to cool it down, which is really cool. And in the winter, kind of a corollary, they will freeze, but they stay in a ball and they move like penguins do, from inside to out. So they keep the queen warm, and they share their body heat, and they're one of the millions of cool things about bees.
Yeah, I had no idea that that they did that. I love honey, and I love autumn draw honey, and when I saw on your profile some things about honey, I was like, I bet you that there's some interesting things. We could probably do a whole interview on bees, but thank you for sharing that.
Well, and I'll throw one more thing out there. My husband used to be a bee inspector for 2 counties, and so he started capturing swarms, and I've only gotten to be part of that once. But when they swarm, they're very, very gentle, because their whole point is this little tornado of bees to bring the queen to their new home. And if you're anywhere near a swarm, there is a whole different energy in the air. It feels like bliss. It's extraordinary. Stand by a swarm if you ever see it.
Are some of your hives in the back, are they swarms that found their way into your? That's awesome. How far?
That's the best bees to get, because you're not getting bees shipped from California that aren't acclimated to Ohio. You're getting Ohio-produced bees.
Wow. And I bet you people freak out when they're, and I've been near a swarm, and I was with a beekeeper that we moved a swarm to his hive, but it is an amazing thing to witness. And I bet you people freak out, and those people who know bees and love them are like, oh, there's a swarm, and you get excited, and you experience that. So, wow. See, I could go on this tangent, and we could talk for the next hour just about bees.
Yeah, bee stories, yeah.
Take us back to your early inspirations, your early years, whatever that is for you. Is that your elementary school? Is it prior to that? Is it middle school? But take us back to those early years when you first started to realize, dabble, write, jot, and you started realizing that creativity and perhaps writing was one of your gifts?
Um, you warned me about this question. I should have thought about it. Um, I'm one of three. My sister is artistically talented. My brother is musically talented, and I was kind of the dull middle child.
Hmm.
Um, I read a lot. I worried about a lot of things. I always had my nose in a library book unless I was getting lost on my little pink bike. But I think that the way we often identify what we're called to do is through difficulty. And I admired and cared so much about what I read that I found it harder to write. You know, it's almost like the Jungian concept of your gift is where your wound is. So, I was always awkward at sports. Nobody wanted me on their team. Probably hurt my feelings a little, but it didn't wound me in any way. But I had a couple. I wrote a short story in high school, I remember, for a teacher I really liked, and he just really marked it with a red pen, which just knocked me down. And then I took one creative writing course in college, thinking, oh, maybe I'll be a documentary filmmaker or a journalist or something. Creative writing was way out there for me. And this professor hated me. He called my language curious verbiage.
Mm.
And I pretty much didn't write for a very long time after all of those kinds of things. And writing, I think, still has its hard things for me because I care so much about it. And I think that's where you identify those sorts of things.
Yeah. So were you that child who, just devoured books and found themselves? Were you writing poetry as a child?
I wrote poetry as a child, and I wrote the typical teenage desperation poems. And I pretty much did not write anything again until I was somewhere in my 40s. I wrote for a living. I edited for a living, but I didn't. I started writing poetry when my mom was dying, and I almost kind of happened upon it with my ADD-ish brain, where I would have like some big project to do, and it was sideways procrastination for me. It was easier to let some creative energy out into a poem. So by putting off doing the big projects that I'm supposed to do until closer to deadline, that's how I have my third poetry book coming out this year. That's procrastination for you. If you do what you're called to do, it's more compelling, even if you're getting paid for the other stuff.
Yeah. Well, while we're on the topic, how did writing poetry or journaling or when you were putting pen to paper, maybe you were typing it out, but how did that help you process that difficult time of your life, your mother's sickness?
I think fear and grief can be like a spring that you have to let that tension out some way. And I don't have gifts like painting or sketching as you do. So, that was one way I could unwind that spring.
Yeah. You had mentioned that your teenage years, you were kind of writing that those teenage desperation lines and those emotions that would probably we all feel as teenagers, right? Is where we're trying to figure out who we are and what our emotions mean, and probably a lot of our poems are about love and loss of love. And you said that you found yourself in a writing that between those teenage writings and your adult career, you find yourself writing and editing right? But it wasn't in poetry. And so it kind of helped us understand and maybe bridge us behind those desperate teen writings to finding yourself writing and editing for a living.
Um, it's a weird trajectory. I started out as a social worker, and couldn't find a job in social work. That was back in the mail a resume, get a written rejection back.
Hmm.
My favorite rejection was from the Lakewood Office on Aging, which I still remember because it was the one perfect line. We do not now, nor do we ever anticipate having a position for which you are qualified. What a line. So anyway, I took a job at a nursing home, at their activity coordinator or whatever that's called now, and did a lot of rabble rousing with the old folks and played the piano. We sang old songs and stuff like that. I read the newspaper. They loved all salacious stories the best. But one of the things I did was I created these poetry workshops, and I didn't write poetry, but it was a way to bring in people with their memories and their people with dementia, and we would have a topic. I'd pass stuff around, and they would contribute lines, kind of like go home at night and turn them into rhyming poems that they liked. And I also created this activity coordinator Northeastern Ohio group meet and share tips, and I started expanding the newsletter and having people would tell their life stories or people would give advice, and that showed me muse writing to help people. And after that, I went into teaching violence workshops for a nonprofit and writing articles for their newsletter, and then I started getting reprint requests. It kind of felt like maybe this is a thing I can do. So that's how those two things.
How that happened, yeah. I like how we, maybe our paths, our careers somehow choose us as well. You talked about that you first started, and maybe I'm connecting dots that don't belong connected, and if that's the case, correct me please. But you said like it was your 40s that you really started to write, and it was about the time that your mother was sick, right? And that's when you found yourself starting to move. What did that look like for you? Did you find yourself writing daily? Were you was it what did that look like?
I had been writing for, publishing articles and creative nonfiction before that, some short stories. I think again it came out of this procrastination when I had big projects to do. It's like poetry leaked out, and I'm not, I show up on time and I make homemade meals. I know how to organize myself, but writing isn't easily forced for me, that kind of writing, and so it just kind of comes of its own will. It's not like, for me, it's not something I can force. And I think it's not a new idea, but I think people who are creative in any way can kind of feel like they're drawing in energy, that they're tapping into something that comes through them. And so it's kind of about honoring that. I'm sure you feel that. I'm guessing you feel that as an artist.
Yes, and as a poet as well. I would imagine that it feels as though you're describing what maybe classic, the classic term of the muse, right? Like something strikes me, and I'm starting to scribe something that feels bigger, and bringing this down and delivering it in a way. Would you agree with that? That since we can't force it, right? And when it's upon us, we kind of we grab it and we start to record those words. Is that what you find as well.
Yeah, and I don't mean that people shouldn't have a writing practice or a drawing practice or that sort of thing. Um, you kind of have to show up and be present, but it's kind of respecting the way that it comes to you feels important to me. And I know the people I teach creative writing classes, mostly memoir to people, and what we find in writing that really moves us, whether it's a memoir piece or a poem or anything, is the more specific you are about your own personal experience and your journey, the more it has a universal application. So that, to just describe a tree and some clouds maybe doesn't do it for people. But if you describe a searing personal experience of embarrassment or shame or joy or love or lust or whatever, it's not anybody else's experience, but they can tap in and feel that same universal feeling.
Yeah, yeah. Describe that time. You said it was your 40s that you started to really write this poetry. When the feelings, the thoughts would come to you, would you grab a pen and write on paper? Would you grab a keyboard and record? Did you record your voice and then come back and write it down? What did that look like?
I kind of had a self-tutorial on that. My first book is a nonfiction book about alternative learning. And all four of my kids were home and relatively young when I was working on that. And so I learned to write like on the backs of envelopes at a stoplight and, wait while you're waiting for a kid to come out of bagpipe lessons or wherever you were. And so that was kind of a good tutorial for capturing stuff as it comes to you. And not all of that is useful. One of the things I do is I tear book reviews out of periodicals I read, and I have little scraps of paper around, and you can see like on the edges I've written something that completely doesn't make sense to me at all, but it did when I wrote it. So I need to do a better job of actually turning those into something.
I love that you're grabbing these thoughts, words, bringing them back together, collaging them into a piece that is meaningful. During that time, and then let me backtrack. Your first book wasn't a poetry book at all, right? It was about alternative learning.
Yeah.
What was that like? Because that was, first of all, you're writing, you do a book on alternative learning, you find a way to write, to create. Was it a book that people would buy and read, or was it something that they would buy online? Was it a digital book? What was that like? Alternative learning.
It's a big ass 300 some page, heavily researched third person book that came through this journey. Anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, a big project. And it taught me a lot of things. In fact, I was writing that when my mother was ill. So I think that was one of my big projects, that I was doing this sideways creative energy into poetry. Poetry is so, I have I think probably 18 books that are partially started and more documents. But poetry fits nicely with my attention span, so that's where I seem to be most productive.
300-page book on alternative learning, and also, which happened shortly or concurrently, you write that first poetry book. What was that poetry book called, or was there a title to that?
The first poetry book is called Tending. It's around here somewhere, and that came out in 2013. So the first big book came out in 2010. But I had, and still, of course, do have the whole, I live in a rural conservative township. I would not say out loud, I'm a poet, which just seems kind of like a sort of a thing around here. And I remember being actually embarrassed when I took this packet to mail to a publisher to consider having it turned into a book, it just felt like, who the heck do I think I am? And, part of that imposter thing for me was all of these years. I had like a plain dealer column for a while. I was a senior editor at Wired for a while. I did these things that writers do, and I didn't call myself a writer because it seemed like a presumptuous. So I would tell the kids I'm typing, or clattering was the word we used in our house for writing. And one of my kids, he had his D&D friends over, and he said something like, "My mom's a writer," which is the first time I'd actually heard it, I think. And I'd already had hundreds of articles published and short stories and stuff, but I'm now able to say it. Took a while.
Did that when your son calls you a writer, and you get to that realization, well, he's right. He is right. I am a writer. Did that change things for you?
Well, we all have our issues, and self-worth is perhaps, my clarion issue, but it does feel good to claim that. And
Yeah.
I don't know if it changed things. Maybe it let me take myself more seriously.
Yeah. Sounded like you had been writing for years, and to be considered a writer or an author, and at that time, what was shifting over to a poet, right? So your 300-page book on alternative learning, and all of a sudden now you are a poet. Those feel like a great compliments, but a movement on the creative continuum, and you're out there in a conservative rural area, and now all of a sudden you find yourself a poet.
Well, and that's again that spring that's tight, because I'm a pacifist, and I believe that everyone has a gleaming soul, and at the same time, when I walk the dogs on our street, all fall, I couldn't help. There were 29 Trump signs on the street, and I'm apparently out as a not a Trump person because of the sculptures in my yard and the peace flags on my porch, that sort of thing. And we've had some issues. I got a death threat when we first moved out here.
Mm.
So that is another spring that's kind of tight. I want to love and respect people, and at the same time, I feel kind of marginalized out here. So some searching sort of work has come out of that too.
Yeah. Your first poetry book, Pending was the title?
Tending with a T.
Tending with a T. Share with us just kind of a overview of that book. I know that it probably has some difficult words in it if you wrote it while you were processing a sick parent. So yeah, just a 10,000-foot view, or if you want to come all the way down to a 1-foot view, and I mean, what did tending look like? What when you finished it? What are some of those memorable things or memorable writings, pieces, poetry in there that's to note?
It's very nature based. It's very searching for meaning, sort of based. We actually lost my husband's mother, my mother, and then my dad in a couple of years. So there was a lot of that, looking for meaning and looking for memory and purpose and that sort of thing.
Was the writing the nature-based? I know that the writing, your poetry that I've read, I love the descriptive. And I see and read that nature as well. Was that Was that part of the healing process? In other words, if I'm dealing with some difficult things, sometimes I want to focus on some of the beauty that is near me because I need to balance my life. I'm not even guessing that that's where you're at, but I guess my question is, was there something similar going on, or was there a different inspiration and process behind that?
I think for any of us who have, I mean, humans are a creative species, and whether you're innovating a recipe or you're custom building a bookshelf, or you're, sculpting or painting or writing, that giving way to that creative impulse can't help but be healing.
Mm.
And we're looking for, or we're letting guidance come into us on how that's going to look, how the final thing's going to look. And so it's almost it almost feels, I look at things I've written, and in some ways I don't even really remember too well writing them.
Mm.
You know.
Yeah. We have some folks that are commenting, and we have even a couple questions. Are you all right with taking, a question or so?
Yeah, it's fine.
Sounds good. Well, we've got folks joining, and so Sabrina, and she's a friend of mine. She just made a comment here, and she said, and maybe this is true, and I'm assuming because she's a pretty researched individual. She said, if bees were to disappear, humans would only last another 4 years before humans would. And I think she's making the comment about our system and how we're dependent upon each other and cross pollination, etc. Does that sound right to you?
I don't know if I've read an exact time frame, but if bees, we would be in serious trouble.
Yeah.
I saw a painting at the Allen Art Museum in Oberlin a couple of years ago. There were murals, and they were showing areas of China that were so polluted that people had to use long Q-tips to pollinate plants.
Mm.
Which is horrifying. I mean, there are other pollinators. There are moths and bees and mason bees. There are other kinds of pollinators. But if we had done something awful enough to kill the bees, they would probably also be in big trouble.
Yeah.
So she's completely right. They'd be in trouble.
Jim said, imposter syndrome is real. We're so glad you pushed through it. And then he had a question. He said, are there other topics that you've wanted to write about that you just haven't gotten to yet? That's probably a long question, but so other topics that you're wanting to write about.
Oh, those are my 18 Word docs that are started books.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, you can learn some focus there.
So, Tending was your first poetry book, right? Your second book. What happened after Tending?
It felt like it kind of turned that engine on. And I have read so many books over the years that are talking about creativity and focus, and on the more magical side of believe and it'll happen sort of thing. And if I look back, it kind of feels like I let myself believe that, because remarkable and wonderful things keep happening to me, and I don't expect them. And I think in part it's this sense of reciprocity, that I care about and amplify other writers, and I read their work, and I buy subscriptions, and I do that sort of thing. And I almost feel like that's an energy you put out there that enriches me, because I love to read this stuff. But it's the only explanation I can have for marvelous things that keep happening to me via poetry. I got I was named Ohio Poet of the Year in 2019. They do that in the fall. And I totally did not believe this phone call. I just thought this was a complete scam, because those kinds of marvelous things don't seem to happen to me, but they are now happening to me. It's pretty amazing.
Were the writings from that first poetry book, was that what brought you to that Poet of the Year, or was it other writings that you were publishing and then were pushing out into the world in other medium?
It was based I was named that based entirely on my second collection, Blackbird.
Oh, so you are 2 books of poetry in, and you were saying that first one had a lot of nature, and your second poetry book, Blackbird, sounds to me like there's some nature there as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of nature. I mean, it's they're just like little packages where I can fit wonder and awe and excitement into. And like one of the things, which is probably one of the least favorite sorts of poems I write, is I'm kind of a science nerd, which means I don't understand it very well, but I'm really interested in it. So I read science journals and fit little packages of something I've read about in a poem, because it kind of expands my awareness to think about that. So both of the books have that, but I gave way more to that in Blackbird.
And for those who are joining now, and we have folks that are popping in, Jared, Siobhan, we see you there. Sabrina just asked a question, which I'm going to get to here in just a moment. But if you share this video out to your circle, your name will go into a drawing, and if your name is drawn next week, you get the opportunity to win some cool little stuff, including some chocolates, but also a copy of Blackbird itself, which we're just getting ready to discuss a bit. So thank you, and we encourage you to do that. So Sabrina asked a question: why did you choose the title Blackbird?
I did not. My publisher chose that, and had a lovely painting commissioned for that. And it was fine with me, because the actual poem Blackbird is about the game that nobody knows about, but it's an ancient game of kind of prognostication, where you have a question in mind and then you open the dictionary to a random page without looking and put your finger on the word. And it's a good mental exercise to see how that word applies. But I've made people do this at poetry readings, and sometimes it's funny and sometimes it's profound, but that's kind of like what a poetry book is anyway, is opening it up and finding meaning. Yeah,
I love that. And what I love about these interviews is sometimes I ask questions and they're presumptuous, and sometimes I put people on the spot. Are you willing to share one of your poems with us?
I could share dozens of poems.
Dozens? I would. So, we would love to hear. We would love to hear a few of. We'd love to hear dozens. But we'd love to hear a few of your favorites.
Oh, yeah, that's like children. You can't. Okay. You don't have faith.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I don't.
A few that are out there right now that are speaking, that are whispering in your ear.
Well, I've written more political poems lately than I used to. I did, in fact, drive some people out of a reading once because they did not like my politics. So that's something I keep carrying with me. But here's one I wrote last fall about the neighbors I was telling you about. All of these are short, so I won't torture you too long. What I notice upon waking. Still stippled by my last dream, I am the old clock's wheeze before striking, and the fly's spring-wound buzz as I slip a window screen open to free him. Breathing in last night's chill, I linger at the window, watch dawn hoist itself over the garden, lighting first the pole beans, then rows of tomatoes, peppers, greens. Hear neighbors slam doors, start trucks, drive away. Sometimes they seem like dictionary terms I can't yet decipher. Name, origin, definition, only a clue to familiar faces behind windows Their perfect gleaming selves set apart by lawn signs declaring their candidates and lawn signs declaring mine. You got to put that somewhere, you know.
Yeah.
Gotta deal with it.
What great words. What a great mental picture that paints for me. Thank you for sharing that.
Well, I'll hit you with one more.
Yeah.
I've been writing COVID poems,
Hmm.
but as I read about viruses, I ran across, I told you about the nerdy thing. I ran across that half of our genetic code comes from viruses that attach themselves to our DNA, and that without these viruses, we would not be human. So that occurred to me when I was listening to a piece of music. So I mashed that together. So I'll torture you with that one.
Love it.
This is called Listening to Philip Glass's Changing Opinions. There may be no pinnacle higher than music. Granted, we invent, build, trade, choose what to believe, even sequence the human genome. The latter leading us to discover we likely owe who we are to ancient viruses. Easily half our genetic code arises from bygone viral invaders, some performing tasks critical for higher order thinking. Maybe music is a murmur, a pulse left by RNA eons ago, an imperative prompting us to bang on skins, pluck tightened cords, blow through reeds, create what we call music, when all along it infected us, made us hosts of a concert started long ago in early light.
I know why you were named Ohio Poet of the Year, and it's because of work like that, and it is really powerful. It's I understand why on your Facebook descriptor you put it's like you're a wonder junkie, right? Because you wonder, right? And you write about that. You ask questions and then you ponder and write words that dig into that question further. Tell us about those. So either of those writings or another writing. Did you sit down and write that? Was that one of those during that you jotted down on a sheet of paper? Did that come at 3:00 in the morning? Did it come at 6 a.m.? Was that during your bagpipe practice? How did those hit you?
Well, the first one I read about opening the window and breathing that cold morning air came right there. So, it took me the time to walk to the computer. And the Philip Glass viral one, I was listening to Philip Glass, and I thought about it. It just occurred to me, this viral thing I had read about. It matched itself together and turned into a poem.
I love.
I'm just writing it. That's all I'm doing.
Do you write and rewrite, and then go back and edit down and shift your poem? Is it something that you labor over later, or do you kind of when I write, I'll very often drop it on a sheet of paper, and I really resist the urge to go back and change. It's kind of like my artwork, because I go back there and my artwork is imperfect. I got pencil lines and I use a Sharpie. I'm like, listen, it is what it is, and I'm done. And that's a difficult thing for me to do, because I think some of the imperfections. I think some of my imperfections are. I mean, they're obvious, but how do you rework, or do you just kind of leave your work out there?
I work as a living as an editor, and that's for other people, which is much easier. And I have a lengthy file of dreck and awfulness. So some things that come out I just really like, and I'm sure that happens to you too. And some things need work. before my first poetry book came out, I did not know any poets as human beings. I just knew them on books and admired them from a distance. And I've had the extraordinary good fortune to have a group of poets. We meet monthly. We used to see each other. And we're called the 811s because apparently that's where poems are labeled in the library, 811 section. And we tell each other what we hate about each other's pieces and tell them how to fix it. And then we usually resist that advice and don't do it. So that's one thing that helps me. Another thing that helps me, and I always tell writing students, is put it away. Like, don't look at it for a week or 2 weeks or months. And then when you get it back out, I don't know if that works the same way with visual art, but when you get it back out, you can see avenues to fix it. But of course, many times I have no idea how to fix something, and I know it's ponderous or pretentious or cutesy, or I hate the last line, and so it just lives forever in the dreck pile.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if it's in a book, you know, you can still hate it. You can still like, oh.
I love that. Blackbird is your newest collection. Did I hear you mention earlier that you have even your next books? I know you've got 18 on deck, but is your next book about ready to hit the world?
My next book is not one of my 18. It is yet another poetry collection because it fits my ADD. But I got an acceptance this morning, so it's got a publisher, so it should be out this year.
Congratulations! I love to hear that. Sabrina said she loves how you take a simple everyday vision and paint such a vivid picture. And that was a comment after you shared some of your writing. Louis Grasso. It is the exact same thing with visual art. Look at it later, it changes, and usually for the better. Strange thing is I write poetry and I kind of leave it. My visual art, I grab Sharpies, and you can't erase Sharpie. Sometimes I hold it up to a mirror, which provides the reflection in reverse. And so it makes me look at my artwork differently, like from Dead Poet Society, one of my favorite movies. I'm forced to stand on the desk and look at it differently. And so I thank you, Louis and Sabrina, for those comments.
I would love to read some of your stuff. Do you have it out there where we can access it?
No, but I will be happy to. As a matter of fact, in the Tuesday at 7 group, and I know there's a lot of folks that are watching because we share these videos out. We're just pushing them out into the world. But there's a Facebook group, Tuesday at 7, and the easiest way to find it is TUES. I don't know if somebody can see this. I guess you can't see it. TUES, the @7. TUES @7, no spaces. But on that Facebook group, we just gather a bunch of creatives from all different swim lanes. We bring them together. We inspire each other. And in that Tuesday at 7, just knowing that we were coming up to interviewing you, Laura, I had challenged people to share some poetry. And so what I will do is I'll post 2 or 3 that, like you said, they're not favorites. Like I can't choose a favorite, but I'll post 2 or 3 from my collections. I have 4 self-published chapbooks.
See, now this is new to me. I had no idea.
Yeah. So, and much of my work is I would call kind of muse-inspired, subconscious or unconscious writing. Sometimes when it hits, I start to grab a pen and I'm just like, I got to get it out. Well, regardless of middle of the night or if I'm driving and I'm writing on the seat next to me, I'm at a stoplight, I pull over, I write, and sometimes I just spill that out, and it's imperfect. It's like Sharpie. I don't erase it. It's just there, and so it's transparent and dirty, and some of it's I look back and it's pretty good, but I'll share some of that on the Tuesday at 7 page. Do do you have another one or two to share for us as we kind of are, kind of coming? And I could talk for hours. Now, I'd imagine we'd have people listening for hours, but share another couple, one or two.
I'll share I'll share two recent ones that are about the lockdown we're in.
Hmm.
Maybe I'll do one lockdown one. This is called Shelter in Place. I think it's Saturday, but it's Tuesday. Afternoon has dragged on long enough to be evening now, though the clock insists it not yet 3. No Zen retreat, no generative challenge. This isolation feels like being lost. Familiar landmarks of paychecks and plans gone. Signposts expected ahead keep disappearing from view. When people lose their way in wilderness, their bodies react as if trapped, their minds as if going mad. Rescuers say the lost exhibit universal behaviors. We seek boundaries, a forest edge or lake shore. We seek signs of civilization, a building or road. Children are more likely to be found alive because they slow down, take refuge. Adults tend to keep moving. Lone men go on longest and least often survive. Sometimes the lost walk trance-like right past search parties. But no organized rescue team searches for us now. Instead, we look out for one another. Can you hear me? I'm calling your name. I will keep calling through this wilderness till we all get out.
Powerful.
I'll read a more cheerful one, and then we can be done.
Sounds good. Powerful. Yeah. Do you before we get to that last one, do you read your poetry in public?
That's also relatively new for me, but yes, I've gotten more comfortable with that.
Do you ever do a kind of a it's something. It would always interest me to hear somebody else read my poetry because I don't know how it strikes other people. But I would love to hear a verbal reciting or recital of some of your work, because to hear it read by the poet, the writer herself, adds something that adds a meaning that I think might be lost if we subjectively read it ourselves.
You know, it would be fun, which occurs to me, is as for me to get to read your work,
Hmm.
and you could read my work. That would be so much more fun.
I'll-
Talk about hearing it in somebody else's voice.
I'm in.
Fun.
Are you in?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I'm in.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what?
I'm working with a friend who wants to do poetry readings, like all poems about sleep staged at a mattress warehouse, or, poems about, at the right setting. And it would be so fun to do.
I'll tell you what. I would love for. And I love performance poetry and stuff like that. I absolutely adore it. I love when poets gather and they challenge each other, and I would even like events where like poets might bring their work and their work gets exchanged, and somebody else has to read and perhaps dramatically read / perform the poet that was given to them, that 30 minutes prior. I would love to see that, because to me that's such a challenge as a creative person myself. Let me see. We've got folks that are coming in and asking questions. Debbie said, and I'm just reading this. I'm not even reading it prior. She says, I usually get a download of a poem in the middle of the night and write it down. Next day she goes back and sees where it and sees and the next day when she goes back, it kind of reveals where it should go from there. I think I enjoy the fact that she says she usually gets a download of a poem in the middle of the night, kind of suggesting that it's kind of pushing itself, and that she's just recording that download. Thank you, Debbie, for sharing that. You're speaking my language, certainly.
I'm impressed that she has the discipline to write them down. That's wonderful.
Yeah. And I want to come to that last piece, but I'd kind of like it to end with that last poem that is kind of whispering in your ear. But before we do that, do you have any tips? If you were to look back at Laura, maybe in her teen years, or maybe post those teenage desperate writing years, and maybe talk about your young Laura in her 20s or maybe 30s, what would you tell yourself back then? What advice would you give yourself about poetry or writing or just life?
You're worth taking the time to actually do what feeds your soul.
Yeah. Succinct and profound all at the same time. We'd love for you to kind of finish us off with another piece of your work.
Oh, well, I'm not sure I have anything worth an ending, but I picked something more cheerful. So, and thank you very much for inviting me. I've enjoyed our conversation. So this is Quicksand. Television during my formative years led me to consider quicksand a significant threat. It has been, though it goes by other names. Surely it has grabbed you too. Seemingly solid ground sinks under your step, pulls you down. Every desperate move made to save yourself drags you deeper. From TV, I learned you survive only with a rope, a stranger, or loyal horse. And something unnamed, something like trust or surrender. You emerge slowly, sliding back a few times, almost lost until gasping, grateful, covered with the stuff. You are saved. Quicksand is everywhere. So too are ropes, strangers, loyal horses. In time, the unnamed becomes familiar.
Sometimes I just like to rest in those words and those ideas. Can somebody win Poet of the Year more than once? Because if so, you deserve it.
You're very kind. I appreciate that. It's one of those magical things.
Yeah.
I never expected.
For those who share this interview, you get an opportunity to win Blackbird, which Laura will mail from her residence out to you, and I'm being presumptuous. You'll probably sign that book too. Is that right? So that autograph means so much.
They can. I'll make them Blackbird chocolates. So
love it. So not only is it a book of magical writing, but it's also personalized with Laura. So please share this out. We appreciate, Laura, you sharing your writing and your time and your journey. So I know that some of the questions I shot were probably were direct and uncomfortable, but you answered and inspired us along the way. How do we contact you if we want copies of Blackbird? How do we get copies of that?
Well, the wonderful Loganberry Books has Blackbird, and I'm also a fan of public libraries, so you can order it from the library. But it's also on Awfulzon, so it's out there.
Thank you, Laura Grace Weldon. She is tagged on this interview. Is a way you can connect with this poet as well. We appreciate you sharing your gifts and your writing with us. We are grateful that you're with us. And for those who are joining or watching later, watching kind of the repeats, or it's 2021, we're dealing with pandemic, and so those folks that are watching here years prior, we've all been inspired by your journey and your writing, and we're grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger.